So, welcome to our channel. Today we'll discuss Dobby and Dobby's road to freedom, his transition from being a house elf, from being a servant, to becoming a free subject, a free elf. So, as you'll see, this road involves moments of negativity, destructive moments, and also positive moments, moments of affirmation, and ultimately this road culminates in his death. And Dobby dies a free elf.
Yeah, so we want to know what did it mean for Dobby to become free, and what actually freedom meant for Dobby to attain. So in that sense, we also have to start with explaining of what does it mean to be free, and what is actually freedom. So could you give us explanation on that?
So, freedom, as we understand it, includes moments of negation and then affirmation. So, as we see with Dobby, his road to freedom first begins with negating the will of his master and then negating his own prior identity as a house elf, as a servant, his own self understanding of what Dobby is. So, that negativity comes with an awareness of contingency, that things could be otherwise, that Dobby doesn't actually have to serve his master, that he doesn't have to be a house elf, that he can be a free elf. So, first, freedom involves this negativity, this awareness of contingency, of possibility of doing otherwise, of being responsible for your actions. And then it involves moments of affirmation, of seeing your will in the acts that you do. And Dobby's road to freedom begins with the sock. And the sock is a very symbolic and important element in the second book. The sock represents property, ownership. It's something that is Dobby's, that Dobby owns, that Dobby can do whatever he wants with. So Dobby comes to recognize his own will in the sock. So that is sort of the first fully positive moment where Dobby comes to recognize his own will, see his own will in an external thing.
So
And then Dobby's road involves um, affirming affirming his will by sacrificing himself for his friends. We'll talk about that in more detail.
yeah,
So
we
freedom,
will
as
get
we
there.
understand that, yeah, involves first negating and then affirming and putting your will in the world and in your actions.
So there are two aspects of freedom what we are discussing here, and one of them is a negative aspect, which is in negating the wishes of others, negating the constraints and chains that are imposed on us. That's the negative aspect of freedom. And the positive aspect of freedom comes from exercising freedom to do the things that we want in affirmation of our will. For example, to do something we want with the property that we have. So suck in this sense means that Dobby has something that he can actually exercise his powers over. And that is the positive aspects of freedom, the positive aspects of giving something, of doing something instead of rejecting some other things, some other wishes. So now that we have these two aspects, let us continue to firstly pose the first question. What does it mean for W to be a free being, a free person? Um, and this is an important question for us because we want to know actually how W became free and what aspects of his freedom he possessed before becoming a full-fledged free being. So, what do you
So,
think on that?
yeah, so that is indeed a central question for us. Dobby's Dobby's affirmation of his own freedom begins with the sock. So Dobby becomes free when he recognizes his own will, and when he wants to see his own will, not the will of the master, but his own will in the things that he does. So, in a way, you become free when you become aware of your own freedom and when you exercise that freedom. And for Dobby, that begins with the sock, and finally, culminates with his own death.
So Dobby possesses a kind of awareness towards his situation, towards his condition, and also he gained the same awareness from others. For example, from Harry, when Dobby comes to Harry and Harry asks him to sit down, he is amazed because nobody asked what he wanted to do, because that would be an instance of as an exercising of the positive aspects of freedom, which Dobby doesn't think that he possesses. So he's amazed in that sense. Um, so we understand that Dobby negated the wish of his masters, the will of Lucius Malfoy, and the things that he wanted to do to Harry, to Hogwarts, by coming to Harry and helping him and his friends in his own way. But what do you think? What else Dobby had to negate in order to become free? What was the other
Yeah.
things that he must transcend in order to become a free person, a free being?
So initially, Dobby's road to freedom, as you said, begins with negating the will of the master, Lucius Malfoy. And as we'll discuss, Lucius is this archetypical master that dominates Dobby, and imposes his will on Dobby. And so in the second book, Dobby starts to struggle with the will of the master. He recognizes that what Lucius wants to do is not something that Dobby wants to do, and that it's something that is bad, and that Dobby doesn't want to be responsible for that. And actually, Dobby wants to help Harry Potter avoid the things that Lucius intends to do. So here, Dobby's will and the will of the master, they clash. And that's this first moment of freedom, first moment of negating the master. But then this negativity is much deeper, because Dobby must negate not only the master and the will of the master, but his own self-understanding and his own identity as a house elf. Because before, what it meant to be Dobby, it was to be a house elf, to be a servant to the Malfoy family. And now, as he is struggling with the will of the master, he also must negate this very identity and, in a way, become alienated from what he thought he was, a house elf, and to destroy that part of him and to affirm Dobby, the free elf. And that comes at the cost, for example, of being alienated from his own community, from other house elves.
So,
So first, it begins with negating the will of the master, and then ultimately also his own identity as a house elf.
Dobby?
Master has given Dobby a sock.
What? I didn't.
Master has presented Dobby with clothes. Dobby is free.
so Dobby became free by negating Lucius Malfoy's will and also by negating his identity as a house elf. That is very much interesting because house elves are identified with their servitude. They they are always beings who are chained to a specific house, and their ownership is also being transferred into one master towards another. So, for example, we have Creature in House Black, who Harry himself becomes his own master in some point. Now, let us continue to know what is the condition, what is the state of Dobby being a free being, and what Dobby in freedom actually looks like. Because this is an important question for us to know what Dobby represents as a free being. And when he comes to Hogwarts in order to get a job from Dumbledore, and Dumbledore even offers him to pay him in a month's salary. He's overjoyed, and he's also being recognized as a free being, but as you said, he's also being alienated from other households in Hogwarts, which are content with their situation, with their servitude. So, what this Dobby looks like in the state of freedom?
So, in a state of freedom, Dobby is somebody who recognizes himself as a free being, and through this destruction of the master of his prior identity, he opens up a lot of possibilities for himself, what Dobby can be. And so a free being is somebody who is aware of those possibilities and who is also aware of the responsibility that comes with choosing one of those possibilities and actualizing it. And so Dobby the free elf is now somebody who sees his own will not only in the property in his sock, but also in his actions and in the things he chooses to do. For example, his decision to help Harry, to help his friends. He does that because he wants to do it, because he loves Harry.
Dare you take a witch's wand? How dare you defy your masters?
Dobby has no master. Dobby is a free elf, and Dobby has come to save Harry Potter and his friends.
So Dobby the free elf is somebody who acts and takes responsibility for his actions as a free being with his own will, not the will of the master, and who makes his own choices and acts on possibility not on the basis of an identity imposed on him by society, for example, doing what a house elf normally should do, but doing what he really wants, what he identifies with. So I think that really is what Dobby the free elf is. And of course also his obsession with owning things. So in the books he buys a lot of clothes for himself, and that is also a symbol of his possession, a symbol of his freedom. That he shows to others that he's free, that he's earning money, he has property, and he's doing things that he wants to do.
Also, he's also being despised by his own kind in Hogwarts and other places, but he doesn't care. That's another aspect of his freedom, and he also takes responsibility, which is an important aspect of becoming free, because Dobby is just responsible before becoming free, is responsible for doing actions in accordance with his own master's wishes in Lucius Malfoy's will, but Dobby is actually having responsibility for exercising his own power, his own freedom towards in affirmation towards his will, which is actually a sign of Dobby being authentic, which is an important aspect of Dobby becoming free. So Dobby in freedom represents an authentic, responsible, positive being who also refuses, who also has his own moments of negation. So what do you think? We know from the books that Hermione tried to free the house elves in Hogwarts. She she wrote pamphlets, she tried to impose rules, she tried to motivate them to protest against their conditions, uh, to form strikes um, against kind of institutionalized conditions that they have. Why do you think Hermione failed to motivate house elves in Hogwarts to attain freedom, to try to negate their identity as an house elf?
Well, I think what we learned from Dobby is that freedom is a struggle that you have to commit yourself to. And what we see in book 2 is that Dobby's road to freedom begins with his own self-awareness of his freedom. Of course, Harry helped him, as you were saying, but it's this first moment of negating the will of the master and identifying himself as a free subject, as a subject capable of doing something else, of doing otherwise. So seeing the contingency of the acts that he does, that he doesn't actually have to be a house elf and a servant, and that awareness then begins his long struggle with his own identity, with the masters, um, with other house elves. Freedom is not something that can just be given, and Hermione's idea that, well, we can kind of make them self-aware is not really something that works in practice. You have to become self-aware yourself through struggle, and only through struggle does freedom become something meaningful, and something actual that you value, as we see with Dobby. If it's granted to you in the way that Hermione wants, then it's not really something that you are able to even appreciate. You just see that as destructive, as negating your way of life, negating your self-understanding as a house elf. You see Hermione just a foreign element trying to disturb your life, your existence, for no good reason,
Yeah,
because you lack that self-awareness of your own freedom that comes through struggle. Um,
yeah, I agree because Hermione tries to force house elves into being free, and that enforcement doesn't lead to their awareness because what is important for them to negate their own servitude, their own essence as house elves, is to be aware of the conditions that they are in. But when they are not aware of their condition, when they are not conscious of being a slave in that situation, then they don't have any reason to negate the wishes of Dumbledore, who is not an oppressive master. And now we can see that there is a kind of contrast between Dumbledore as the master of house elves in Hogwarts and Lucius Malfoy as the master of Dobby in House Malfoy. How do we can understand this contrast? How do we can categorize Lucius Malfoy as a master? Because this is also important for us that we are discussing Dobby as a dialectical subject, as a Hegelian dialectical subject here, and the role of masters also is as important as the slave as a slave here. Um,
yeah, so Lucius, unlike Dumbledore, is somebody who self-identifies as a kind of master. It's his whole identity, built on bloodline, built on domination of others, particularly those who he deems as lower type of creatures than himself. And he wants to dominate by destroying the will of the other, destroying the will of Dobby, and that impulse to destroy the will, to completely negate Dobby, actually also leads Dobby to then rebel against Malfoy, and ultimately become free from Malfoy's tyranny. So Malfoy, yes, is this archetypical master
mhm.
where his whole identity is built on domination, on bloodline, on supremacy. But ultimately, also we see that this is just illusionary, because Lucius is himself a servant to the Dark Lord, and we see in Book 6 and Book 5 that he also must humiliate himself and become almost like a house elf to the Dark Lord. So Lucius kind of personifies this idea of masterhood that is always illusionary and ultimately ends up um, leading to his own servitude. Whereas Dobby, this archetype of a servant, actually gains freedom, and
Yeah,
it's Dobby that becomes more free than Lucius.
it's just like house elves and elves in general that they cannot possess a wand. Also, the Dark Lord gets Lucius's wand from him in order to attack Harry, and this is a disrespect to a wizard, and this is a way to show that they are a lower creature than the other person. So Lucius Malfoy himself is like a slave towards Voldemort. But what do you think is the difference between Voldemort and Lucius Malfoy himself? Because they don't seem to be the same archetype to have the same archetype as the master, and one of them only seeks total destruction, while the other one wants to control, wants to consume, wants to play in the bureaucratic procedures of the society. What do you think is their contrast?
So, in some sense, both have this desire for domination, control, and mastery, but it is expressed in a different way. For Malfoy, it's expressed through institutions, through bloodline. But for Voldemort, this obsession of mastery comes from something else. It comes from his own fear and from his own master, which is death, and his desire to conquer that. And then, of course, his inability to do that. And so Voldemort could be seen as this nihilistic master that just seeks destruction, seeks consumption to then overcome his own master, which is death and his fear of death. So Malfoy is in a way a lower type of master that submits to Voldemort, submits to institutions, whereas Voldemort is in a way both a master but also a servant of his own fear of death and his desire to consume death, to destroy death. And that's something that is almost paradoxical. And of course, he fails to do that. And in a way, he's lost in this negativity. He wants purely negative freedom, freedom that comes from destruction, but he's not able to actualize it. He's not able to actualize it through friendship, through being part of a community, through sacrifice, something that Dobby is able to achieve. So, in a sense, Voldemort kind of represents this pure negativity, whereas the masterhood that Malfoy represents is very institutional, institutionally embedded.
So just as Lucius Malfoy is a slave towards Voldemort, Voldemort himself is a slave toward death. But there is a difference for death being your master and Voldemort being your master, because death cannot be overcome by other things, by other measures, and the will that Voldemort possesses is only negative. So he only tries to conquer death by trying to undermine it, trying to destroy it, which is obviously cannot be done because nobody cannot be the master of death. And he also fails to be to even get the simple components like the Elder Wand and other measures to become the master of death. But what is important here is to understand that Voldemort cannot free himself from being a slave of death because he doesn't have a perspective of applying a kind of positive freedom. Because just as you said, for Dobby cherishes friendship, and Harry cherishes love, friendship, and they are all free beings because their positive aspect of exercising freedom is to give something without this expectation of getting something in return from having something in return. And this giving love, um, this moment of love is what Voldemort lacks. As Harry says, that you never that he says to Voldemort that I pity you and you because you never felt love, you never had love. Because that is the moment that we understand that Voldemort is not truly free and he's not truly exercising his power as a free being, and that's why he's destined to fail because he cannot exercise, he cannot give without an expectation of getting something back in return.
You're the weak one, and you'll never know love or friendship. And I feel sorry for you.
And we are going to get back to this conversation in our later works, but right now we are going to focus again on Dobby. So we we saw that Dobby is a different subject, different from Voldemort and from not fully from Lucius Malfoy, but in some sense from Lucius Malfoy because he also has to negate his own essence as an house elf. And this awareness is in continuity with his actions and throughout the story. So, with this awareness and continuity of this awareness, he decides at the end to sacrifice himself for Harry and his friends, or to say for his friendship. He gives his life with no expectations. Would you think that Dobby was free in all this, and that Dobby died as a free elf, or just Dobby just died in vain without becoming fully free? What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I think again it comes down to this notion of positive freedom, of what it actually means to then exercise your freedom, to use this power of freedom and to place it in the world, as opposed to just this negative, destructive freedom that is not realized, is not actualized. And Dobby's death does represent the full actualization in a way of his freedom. Because Dobby, yes, first he negates the master, he negates the identity of house elf, but then he asserts his freedom as a worker for Hogwarts, as a friend of Harry Potter, um, as somebody that chooses then to sacrifice himself, his own life, exactly as you said, without any expectation, without anything in return. It's not an instrumental thing. He chooses to sacrifice, to risk his life, to save something that he loves, that he believes in, that he cherishes. And that is the ultimate sovereign moment where his freedom becomes fully actualized. And for the sake of freedom, in a way, he transcends even himself, his own limitations, his own life. So Dobby, out of all of those masters like Voldemort and Bellatrix and Malfoy, who want to achieve ultimate power, in a way, ultimate freedom, Dobby is the one that is actually able to do that. And as we'll discuss also later in our videos, the masterhood and this kind of freedom through domination, through destruction, ultimately is illusionary and unsatisfactory. Whereas Dobby's freedom that culminates with a sacrifice is the true sovereign moment of freedom.
Mm.
Such a beautiful place to be with friends. Dobby is happy to be with his friend, Harry Potter.
So with this we conclude that Dobby died a free elf because not only he negated and affirmed, not only he negated the will of his masters and his identity, but he also acted in accordance with his own wishes, with what he himself chose to do, uh, with being aware of it, and that's the ultimate state of being free. And Dobby indeed died a free elf.
Yeah, so this concludes our story from Dobby's beginning as a house elf, as the ultimate servant, to then actually achieving ultimate freedom.
Yeah.
And dying a free elf, a free subject.
Yeah. So I hope that you've enjoyed our conversation. If you like to hear more, you can like this video and subscribe to our channel. We would be publishing more on this. And you can also ask us for more philosophical analysis, more conceptual analysis on the things that you think are interesting. And we would also continue this path towards our freedom, towards, towards reaching a better understanding of how we can be free.
Yeah, and freedom, as we learned from Dobby, begins with self-awareness. So, all right. So stay free.
Stay free.